Halloween is a unique and ancient tradition. It is a night of delightful contradiction, a night when we celebrate fear, when we encourage strangers to come to our doors, and when we all agree to wear masks, hiding our true faces from the world. We decorate our homes to look like places of death and decay, and we send our children out into the darkness to collect candy. It is a shared, collective ritual, a single night when the veil between our safe, normal world and a darker, more playful one seems to thin. But for most of us, the horror is all part of the fun. The monsters are fake, the scares are scripted, and we know that at the end of the night, the masks will come off. But what happens when the person behind the mask is a real monster? What happens when the terror isn't part of the show, but a genuine threat hiding in plain sight? On the one night of the year when everyone is pretending to be a monster, it becomes the perfect hunting ground for the ones who aren't pretending at all. These are 3 allegedly true stories from people who came face to face with the real horror of Halloween, a horror that didn't end when the night was over. Our first story tonight comes from a woman named Chloe, who recounts a Halloween from her childhood in the late 1990s. Her story is a chilling reminder that on a night filled with fake monsters and playful scares, the most terrifying thing in the world can be a human being who is simply wrong. She learned that a mask doesn't have to be made of plastic, and that some costumes are worn all year round. What she and her friends experienced was not a prank, but a close encounter with a quiet, patient, and deeply predatory form of madness that had found the perfect camouflage in the chaos of Halloween night. I was about 10 years old, and it was my favorite night of the year, Halloween. My neighborhood went all out. Every house was covered in fake cobwebs and skeletons, and the streets were swarming with kids in costumes, laughing and trading candy. My 2 best friends, Sarah and Mike, and I were a classic trio. I was a witch, Sarah was a ghost made from a bedsheet, and Mike was a vampire, complete with a plastic cape and fake fangs. Our parents gave us the usual lecture about staying together and not talking to strangers, and then they set us loose into the cool autumn night with our empty pillowcases, ready for an adventure. We spent the first hour hitting all the best houses, the ones that gave out the full-size candy bars. The night was perfect. The air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and the sound of excited, happy screams filled the air. Around 8 p.m., we decided to head down a street we usually avoided. It was a long, dark cul-de-sac at the edge of the neighborhood with only a few houses, all of them set far back from the road. It had a reputation for being creepy, which, on Halloween night, made it the ultimate challenge. The first 2 houses were dark, their owners either not home or not participating in the festivities. Then we came to the 3rd house. It was an older, 2-story home, and it was decorated more elaborately than any we had seen. It had a full, makeshift graveyard on the front lawn, complete with crumbling styrofoam tombstones and fake skeletal arms reaching up from the dirt. In the center of the yard, there was a scarecrow. It was incredibly lifelike. It was dressed in old, torn farmer's overalls and a flannel shirt, with a burlap sack for a head and straw sticking out of its sleeves. It was posed as if it were standing guard over the fake graves. It was a fantastic decoration, and we all stopped for a moment to admire how creepy it was. We ran up to the front door, which was lit by a single, flickering porch light, and rang the bell. An elderly woman answered, smiled, and dropped a generous handful of candy into each of our bags. As we were walking away, giddy with our score, Mike turned back to look at the yard. "Hey, guys," he said, his voice a little shaky. "Did that scarecrow move?" Sarah and I laughed at him. "You're just trying to scare us," I said. "It's just a dummy, Mike." But as we looked, I felt a small, cold prickle of unease. The scarecrow's head seemed to be tilted at a slightly different angle than it was before, now aimed more directly at us. We shrugged it off and continued down to the last house on the cul-de-sac. It was also dark. As we turned around to head back to the main street, we had to pass the scarecrow house again. This time, we all saw it. As we walked by, the scarecrow's head slowly and deliberately turned to follow our movement. It wasn't the wind. It was a smooth, silent, and undeniably intentional motion. We froze in the middle of the street, our hearts pounding in our chests. The fun, playful fear of Halloween was instantly replaced by a real, gut-wrenching terror. The man in the scarecrow costume was not a dummy. He was real. He was just standing there, in the middle of the yard, his body perfectly still, his masked head now pointed directly at us. We were a good 50 feet away, but we could feel his silent, intense gaze. "Of here, let's get out," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. We started walking, trying to act casual, but quickly broke into a full sprint, not stopping until we were back on the brightly lit main street, surrounded by other trick-or-treaters and parents. We were breathing heavily, a mixture of fear and adrenaline coursing through our veins. We had just experienced a real Halloween scare, and it was a story we couldn't wait to tell everyone. We calmed down after a few minutes, our fear turning into a nervous excitement. We decided he was probably just a dad trying to get a good scare out of the local kids, a master prankster taking his role very seriously. Feeling braver now that we were back in a group, we decided to circle the block and come back down the street from the other direction to see if he was still there. As we approached the cul-de-sac again, we saw a police car, its lights flashing silently, parked in front of the scarecrow house. The elderly woman who had given us candy was outside, talking to two officers looking distraught. Curiosity got the better of us. We crept closer, hiding behind a large hedge to listen. The woman was crying. "I don't understand," she sobbed to the officers. "My husband, George, he has severe paralysis from a stroke. He can't move, he can't speak. I put him in his old overalls and set his wheelchair out in the yard as a scarecrow. He loved Halloween. I just went inside for a moment to get the candy, and when I came back out, his wheelchair was empty. He was gone." One of the officers put a comforting hand on her shoulder, while the other scanned the dark woods behind the house with his flashlight. A wave of nausea and pure, unadulterated terror washed over the three of us. The man in the scarecrow costume, the man who had been standing in the yard, the man whose head had slowly turned to watch us. It wasn't the woman's husband. It was someone else. Someone who had come out of the dark woods, taken a paralyzed old man out of his wheelchair, and had put on his clothes as a disguise. This wasn't a prank. We had been watching a real-life predator who had used the perfect camouflage of Halloween night to get close to a house, to observe the neighborhood. We didn't know what to do. How could we possibly explain what we had seen? That a scarecrow had moved? They would think we were just kids, caught up in the spooky fantasy of the night. We were terrified. The man hadn't just been trying to scare us. He had been standing there in the middle of that yard, wearing a sick costume made from a sick man's clothes, and he had been watching us. He had been watching us with a silent, patient, and predatory intensity. What had he been planning to do? What did he want with us? They never found the woman's husband, George, and they never found the man who took his place in the yard that night. He had simply vanished back into the darkness from which he had come. A ghost who had worn a scarecrow's skin for a few terrifying minutes. The incident was a local mystery for a while. A sad story about an old man who must have wandered off, but we knew the truth. We knew that we had looked into the eyes of a real monster, one who used the fun and innocence of Halloween as his personal hunting ground. After that night, Halloween was never the same for me. The fun was gone, replaced by a lingering, deep-seated fear. Every time I see a person in a mask, a small cold part of me wonders what's really underneath. Is it a friend, a neighbor, a child having fun? Or is it someone like the still man, someone with dead, empty eyes and a silent, patient hunger, someone who has found the one night of the year when they can walk among us, hiding their true face in plain sight, looking for their next victim? That night taught me a horrifying lesson. The most effective masks are not the ones made of plastic or rubber. They are the ones made of our own expectations. We expected to see a fake monster, so that's all we saw, until it was almost too late. The man in the scarecrow costume knew this. He knew that on Halloween, no one looks twice at a monster standing in a yard. It is the perfect disguise. He blended in, he watched, and he waited, and I have no doubt in my mind that he is still out there, waiting for the next Halloween. Our second story comes from a viewer named Kevin, who shares a memory from his teenage years. He and his friends decided to explore a part of their town they had never been to on Halloween, looking for better candy and bigger scares. They found a neighborhood that was a little too dedicated to the holiday, and one house in particular that offered a treat that was far more terrifying than any trick. His story is a chilling reminder that on Halloween night, the invitation to take only one can sometimes be a test, a rule that you should never, ever break. I was 15, and my friends and I had grown a bit too old for traditional trick-or-treating, but we were not ready to give up on the free candy. We decided to drive to the rich side of town, a neighborhood of sprawling, mansion-like houses where we assumed the candy would be of a much higher quality. As we drove through the unfamiliar streets, we were stunned. This neighborhood didn't just celebrate Halloween, it was a professional-level production. Fog machines, animatronics, and elaborate decorations were everywhere. It was a Halloween paradise. We parked the car and set out on foot, our pillowcases ready, feeling the familiar childish excitement of the night. We spent an hour going from one incredible house to the next, collecting gourmet chocolates and king-size candy bars. The people were friendly, all playing their parts, dressed as monsters and ghouls. Then, we came to the end of a long, winding street and found a house that was different from all the others. It was a large, modern-looking house, but it had no decorations, no jack-o'-lanterns, no fake skeletons, nothing. The only sign that they were participating was a single, simple, and impeccably clean white bowl, placed on a small table on the front porch, right under the porch light. It was filled to the brim with what looked like exquisite, handmade chocolates. A small, neatly printed sign was propped up next to the bowl. It read, in a simple, elegant font, "Happy Halloween. Please, take only one." We were a little disappointed by the lack of effort, but the chocolates looked incredible. They were wrapped in shiny, gold foil, far fancier than anything we had received all night. My friends, Jake and Kyle, each grabbed one piece as the sign instructed, but I was a greedy teenager. I figured the owners were just being cheap. I looked around. The street was empty, so I grabbed a huge handful of the gold-wrapped chocolates and shoved them deep into my candy bag, laughing. As my hand left the bowl, two things happened at the exact same moment. First, the bright, white porch light instantly switched to a deep blood red. Second, a loud, blaring alarm like an air raid siren began to sound from speakers we hadn't noticed, hidden in the eaves of the house. We froze in panic. We thought we had triggered some kind of elaborate prank, a jump scare. We waited for a monster to jump out, for a hidden animatronic to roar at us. But nothing happened. There was just the deafening siren and the house, now bathed in a horrifying, pulsing red light. We didn't wait to find out what came next. We ran. We sprinted back down the street, our hearts pounding, the siren wailing behind us. We didn't stop until we were several blocks away, back in the normal part of the neighborhood. The sound of the siren had faded, and the world was once again filled with the happy, cheerful sounds of Halloween. We were breathing heavily, laughing with a mixture of terror and relief. It was, we all agreed, the best scare of the night. We were convinced it was an incredibly well-executed prank on a greedy trick-or-treater. I felt a strange sense of pride. I had been the one to trigger it. Later that night, back at my house, we were dumping out our hauls to admire our collection. I had completely forgotten about the incident at the odd house. But, as I emptied my pillowcase onto my bedroom floor, I saw them. The shiny, gold foil-wrapped chocolates. There were about a dozen of them. "Dude, you have to try one of these," Jake said, unwrapping the single piece he had taken. He popped it in his mouth. "It's amazing," he said, his eyes widening. "It's like the best chocolate I've ever had." Kyle ate his too and agreed. I picked up one of my own, the prize from my greedy handful. I unwrapped the gold foil, but what was inside was not chocolate. It was a small, hard, and irregularly shaped object. It looked organic. It was a dark, brownish red, and it had a strange, coppery smell. I dropped it in disgust. I unwrapped another one. It was the same, and another, all of them. My friends, who had taken only one, had received a delicious gourmet chocolate. But my handful, the ones I had taken in defiance of the rule, were something else entirely. They were not treats. They were something horrible, disguised as a treat. My blood ran cold as a horrifying realization washed over me. The sign, the bowl, the alarm. It wasn't a prank. It was a test of obedience, of self-control. And I had failed it miserably. The house knew. It knew that I had taken more than one, and it had given me a different and very special treat as a consequence. What were these disgusting things? What was I supposed to have eaten? The thought made me feel physically ill. The house wasn't just giving out candy. It was passing some kind of terrifying, silent judgment on the people who came to its door. The next day, driven by a morbid and fearful curiosity, I convinced my friends to drive back to that neighborhood with me. We had to see the house in the daylight. We found the street, but as we drove down it, we couldn't find the house. All the other mansions were there, just as we remembered. But where the odd, modern house should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty, overgrown lot, sandwiched between two other homes. There was no house, no porch, no bowl. Just a rusty chain-link fence and a faded, "for sale" sign that looked like it had been there for at least a decade. We were completely bewildered. We were in the right place. We were sure of it. We had all seen it. We had all stood on that porch. Jake and Kyle had eaten the chocolate from that bowl. But the house was gone, as if it had never existed at all. It was an impossible, terrifying contradiction that made our heads spin. Were we going crazy? Did we somehow imagine the whole thing? A collective hallucination brought on by the excitement of Halloween night? But I still had the evidence. The disgusting, non-chocolate treats, now sealed in a plastic bag in my bedroom. We never found an explanation. The house on the empty lot remains the single most inexplicable and terrifying event of my entire life. I have come to believe that the house, or whatever it was not a normal place. It was something that appears only on Halloween night, a place that exists between the cracks of our reality. It comes to test the people who wander down its dark street. It offers a simple choice, a simple rule to follow. Those who obey are rewarded with a simple, sweet treat. But those who are greedy, those who fail the test, they get something else. I threw the bag of treats away. I never wanted to know what they really were. But the memory of them, and the memory of that house, has stayed with me. It taught me a valuable lesson about greed, and a more terrifying lesson about the nature of Halloween. It taught me that On that one night of the year, strange doors can open, and if you are unlucky enough to knock on one of them, you had better be prepared to play by the rules, because some hosts do not take kindly to guests who do not follow their instructions. I still think about that house sometimes. I think about the clean white bowl, the elegant sign, and the sudden blaring siren. It was a trap, a perfectly designed and executed trap for the greedy. And I had walked right into it. What would have happened if I had actually eaten one of those things? Would I have vanished, just like the house did? Or would I have become a part of its strange, terrifying tradition? These are questions I will never have an answer to, and frankly, I am glad. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I never went trick-or-treating again after that night. The fun of it was gone, replaced by a deep, lingering unease. Every time I see a bowl of candy left out on a porch with a sign that says, "Please take one," I feel a chill run down my spine. I think of the house that wasn't there, and I wonder how many other strange and temporary doors open on Halloween night, just waiting for the right or the wrong person to come knocking. It's a terrifying thought, that the world is thinner and stranger than we think. Our final story tonight comes from a viewer named Maya, who used to work at one of those seasonal pop-up Halloween stores. She learned that on the one night of the year dedicated to masks and disguises, the most terrifying costume is the one that you can't take off. Her experience is a chilling and deeply personal account of a customer who wasn't just shopping for a costume, but was methodically crafting a new identity. She became the unwilling final piece of his horrifying transformation, a witness to a quiet and patient madness that had found its perfect expression in the playful horror of the Halloween season. For 3 years in a row during college, I worked at one of those big, seasonal Halloween stores, the kind that pops up in an empty retail space in September and vanishes by the middle of November. It was a fun job, mostly. I love Halloween, and I enjoyed helping people put together the perfect costume. The store was always busy, a chaotic and cheerful place filled with kids excited about monsters and adults rediscovering their playful side. But in my final year working there, I had a series of encounters with a customer that turned my favorite holiday into a source of deep and lasting fear. He wasn't like any other customer I had ever dealt with. He first came in during the last week of September. He was a small, quiet, and intensely forgettable man. He looked to be in his late 40s, with thinning hair, glasses, and a plain beige jacket. He didn't browse. He walked directly to the mask aisle and stood there for almost an hour, just staring. I finally went over to ask if he needed any help. He seemed startled, as if he had forgotten other people existed. He pointed to a simple, blank white plastic mask, the kind you might use for a mime costume or to paint your own design on. "Just this," he whispered, his voice soft and raspy. He bought the single mask and left without another word. He came back the next week at the same time, on the same day. He went straight to the face paint and makeup section. Again, he just stood there for a long, long time, staring at the rows of colorful paints. I approached him again. This time, he seemed to be expecting me. Without looking at me, he pointed to a single color of grease paint, a very specific, pale and corpse-like shade of gray. He bought only that. His weekly visits became a strange, silent ritual. The next week, he bought a can of glossy, black spray paint. The week after that, a single, fine-tipped paintbrush. He was assembling a toolkit, piece by painstaking piece. Each time he came in, he was a little more unsettling. He never made eye contact, but I could feel him watching me as I worked, a heavy, constant gaze that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He was building something, and for some reason, he had chosen me to be the silent witness to his process. My co-workers started to notice him too. They called him the Watcher. His visits were so regular and so strange that he became a piece of our store's internal folklore. We would joke about what kind of terrifying mask he must be creating in his basement, but our jokes were always tinged with a real, nervous edge. The week before Halloween, he came in for the last time. As always, he was quiet and methodical. This time, he walked to the back of the store and picked out a single item, a long, dark, hooded cloak, the kind that obscures the wearer's entire body. It was the final piece of his costume. He brought it to my register, as he always did. As I was ringing him up, he finally spoke to me in a voice that was more than a whisper. "It's almost finished," he said, his eyes still fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "I value your opinion. Would you like to see it?" A cold, electric shock of fear went through me. I should have said no. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to decline, to make an excuse, to call for a manager. But I was a 20-year-old college kid, conditioned to be polite to customers. Sure," I stammered, my voice barely working. He nodded slowly. "I will be back," he said, "on Halloween night, after you close. I will show you then." He took his purchase and walked out of the store, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding, feeling like I had just unwillingly accepted a terrifying and unbreakable appointment. The thought of him coming back to an empty store after we closed was a deeply disturbing one. I told my manager about the conversation. He was a decent guy, and he took me seriously. He agreed it was creepy, and he offered to walk me to my car after our shift on Halloween night. The big night finally arrived. The store was an absolute madhouse, a chaotic whirlwind of last-minute shoppers. I was so busy that I almost managed to forget about my strange, silent customer and his promised visit. At 10 p.m., we finally closed the doors, locked them, and began the long process of cleaning up the disaster of a store. By the time we were finished, it was almost midnight. My manager, true to his word, walked with me out the back employee entrance into the dark, mostly empty parking lot. My car was one of the last ones there, parked under a flickering, unreliable light post at the far end of the lot. As we approached my car, we saw a figure standing beside it, perfectly still, waiting in the shadows. It was a person dressed in the long, dark, hooded cloak. My heart stopped. It was him. He had kept his promise. He was here to show me his creation, to complete our strange and silent ritual. "Hey, the store is closed," my manager yelled, his voice trying to be authoritative but betraying a nervous edge. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, a silent, dark statue in the eerie, flickering light of the parking lot. "I think you should go," my manager said, stepping in front of me protectively. The figure slowly, deliberately, raised its hands and pulled back the hood of the cloak. The face that was revealed was not a monster mask from our store. It was the blank, white plastic mask he had bought weeks ago, but it had been transformed into a work of pure psychological art. He had painted it. The base was the corpse-like gray, but on top of that, he had painted a face. It was an impossibly detailed, photorealistic portrait of a human face. The expression was one of quiet, serene, and absolute madness. The eyes were wide and staring, but they were painted with such skill that they seemed to follow you, and the mouth was stretched into a long, thin, and unnaturally peaceful smile. It was the most terrifyingly beautiful and beautifully terrifying thing I had ever seen. It was a masterpiece of horror, but that wasn't the part that made me scream. The face he had so perfectly and meticulously painted on the mask was my manager's. It was a perfect, lifelike, and utterly soulless replica of the man who was standing right next to me. My manager just stared at it, his own face a mask of pale, frozen disbelief. He was looking at his own dead-eyed reflection, worn by a silent stranger in a dark parking lot. The man in the painted mask slowly raised a hand and pointed a single gloved finger, first at my manager's face and then at the identical painted face on his own mask, as if to say, "See, it's finished. It's you." We didn't wait to see what he would do next. My manager grabbed my arm and we ran. We scrambled back towards the store, fumbling with the keys, and locked ourselves inside, calling the police with shaking hands. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. He had vanished as silently as he had appeared, leaving no trace, just the lingering, nightmarish image of that painted face burned into our minds forever. He hadn't threatened us. He hadn't attacked us. He had done something far, far worse. He had shown us his art. The police were sympathetic, but there was nothing they could do. A man wearing a creepy mask in a parking lot on Halloween. Night wasn't a crime, but we knew what it really was. It was a statement. It was a final, horrifying reveal. This man hadn't just been making a costume. He had been studying my manager for weeks, every time he came into the store, learning the contours of his face, the shape of his eyes, the line of his mouth. He had been creating a new identity, a new skin to wear, and he had chosen me to be the witness to his transformation. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't go back into that store. Every time I looked at my manager, I could only see the dead, painted eyes of the mask. Halloween is no longer my favorite holiday. It is a source of a deep and abiding fear. I now understand that the most terrifying monsters are not the ones with fangs and claws. They are the quiet, patient, and methodical ones, the ones who watch you, who study you, and who decide that they want to wear your face as their own. And Halloween is the one night of the year when they can walk right up to you and show it. To you.